Now, meantime, apparently the premiers, now again, in the same way I don't believe that any of the fights between the Greens and Labor are real. The fights between Labor state premiers and a Labor federal government, they ain't real. There's a lot of kabuki theatre and noise. But apparently they're trying to say that they want a greater say in the immigration flow to be able to say, hey, look, we're Queensland, we need X numbers of this type of person, and feeding that into the overall machine that Canberra helps decide the people that come into the country. Now, of course, as we have long discussed, 90% of anyone who's a new arrival to Australia ends up in Sydney or Melbourne. Reality is there'll be issues in Western Australia, regional Queensland, and those people aren't normally front in the queue. If this is real, is this a good idea?
Yeah, look, I think it is a good idea because, the whole problem, Paul, with our immigration system here right now is that the feds get to decide, how big the intake is, and the states have to provide all the services, all the housing, all the infrastructure. You live in Sydney, you know what it's like. People in Melbourne, they know what it's like. This is a really big, and I think it's the big sleeper issue, Paul, going into the election, which could be as soon as, 12 months from now. Let's be realistic about this. The fact is that the immigration system is a mess. We know that this is causing a lot of dislocation. We know that household income has shrunk. We know that the GDP is getting a sugar hit, but actual household incomes are going backwards. Housing prices, I don't care what some of these economists out there on Twitter say, it is being driven up by this mass migration. If we had more skilled migrants and fewer, students who are really glorified Uber drivers coming in here, that would be a big benefit to the economy. But the states need to be able to have a bit of a say because they're the ones who have to cop it.
Well, but also, I'd like to see the government turn around and look into, if not outright say, we're going to pause family reunion for 12 months, right?
Absolutely.
So the only people coming in are the ones that are absolutely necessary, allegedly, for the economy. But of course, as we know, the whole reason this is done is a pump and dump scheme from Treasury to keep their numbers ticking over. So right now, the Australian budget is in a surplus, but households in Australia are in a recession. The great divide between,
exactly right.
Canberra class and reality. Yeah. Go for it.
Yeah, exactly right. We're going backwards on a per person level. The only reason our GDP, our overall economic output's going up is because we're importing a lot more people from overseas. And look, I agree with you, Paul, that these confected fights between the Labor premiers and the Labor federal government remind you a bit of WWE wrestling, right? Like, Hulk Hogan breaking the chair that's already broken.
Yeah. It's about as real as War Games coming up this weekend in Survivor Series.
That's right. But unfortunately, we're all the victims of all this because the Federal Labor Party has totally botched our emergence from the COVID pandemic. They spent years nitpicking over every little thing that the former coalition government did during COVID and claiming they would do better. Well, now they've been given the reins and they actually had to govern. They had to work out how to open our borders. They've been closed for a couple of years. We obviously needed to bring migrants back in, and they've just totally botched it. They've just opened the floodgates without any planning. And while I don't disagree with this sort of idea that's going forward, but it shouldn't be the state government's job here. This should be the federal government's job. They have the job of controlling the borders. How hard is it to make sure that the numbers we're taking in aren't causing massive pain around the country? They just haven't had their hand on the wheels here. They have just let things rip. And we're all paying the price for it.
Yeah, but Matt, I think they know that they're letting it rip, but they're letting it rip because they need the GDP numbers to stay strong. The only thing that is keeping Australia afloat right now is this migration. And, I know we have in Australia this almost religion of the economy and GDP, but there's also a big social cohesion point on this. If you look at the latest Scanlon report on social cohesion, it's way down. I think part of that's COVID, but, I think also when you have so many people who are trying to bring in and turn into Australians, there's a limit to the number that we can as a society do.
But literally, as we spoke about last night, right, with the Turbans for Australia people, there are lines for food in Australia.
Correct.
Right? So more in, right? The lines for the rental properties. The fact that right now in Ipswich, if there's a rental property, 120 people will look at it. Now, God love, and I want as many people to be listening to River 949 as possible. Love you, Drew. But the reality is that is an unusual scenario when the rental market is that tight in a place like Ipswich.